Well, even with two state budgets brought down today, the focus of economists was absolutely on the Reserve Bank Governor Phil Lowe as he spoke in Sydney about escalating inflation crises affecting not just Australia, but of course economies around the world. Now, it's been a bit of a rough year for the RBA, which has been forced into sharp tightening of monetary policy. But as Philip Lowe assured us today, he doesn't see a recession on the horizon. That's, of course, if you believe him, given the RBA's copped criticism for being too slow to date to respond to the inflation risk and for helping to fuel the housing boom. Remember, this is the same RBA that previously stated interest rates would not rise until 2024, only then raised them twice in recent successive months. More increases are expected. So what do we need to know out of today's speech by the Governor? Sky's own business editor, Ross Greenwood, joins me now. Well, a key takeaway today, Ross, from Phil Lowe's speech seems to be that we're facing choppy waters, sure, but he says he was positive about our overall economic position, and those comments about a recession being unlikely, I'm sure, are welcome by people watching this program. But what do you think, Ross? Do you share his economic optimism?
Well, look, you'd like to, and that's the reality of it. You'd like to imagine that Australia can somehow avoid recession. It's not a good thing for families, not a good thing for business, and you'd really hope that both the government and also the Reserve Bank can come together and really avoid it. But we know there are risks, and the risks really come from what we see overseas, especially in the United States, where now some 70% of economists believe the US will go into recession. And of course, that will have a knock-on effect around the world. The UK, similarly, with inflation now getting close to 11%, that's got a similar situation, and it faces recession as it raises interest rates rapidly. Here we know there's going to be significant increases in interest rates. The one thing Australia's got going for us is full employment right now. But the reality is the risks are there, and the Reserve Bank cannot be necessarily assured that Australia won't slip into recession. Major bank economists say probably not, but certainly if interest rates rise as high as money markets say they will, it's probably almost assured that Australia will have a recession.
I'm sure you talk to the same sort of business leaders I do, but they're pretty bearish about circumstances here and overseas, and the economy thrives on confidence. How much contrition should the RBA have for comments it's made in the recent last couple of years that have turned out to be a long way off the mark?
Well, I think significant. I mean, one of the problems I see as the Reserve Bank is it almost is beyond reproach that you can't criticise the decisions of the Reserve Bank. In many ways, historically, because it's been the bank of Australian banks, it really has not been the subject of criticism. And when it makes mistakes, I think both Philip Lowe, the Governor, and the Reserve Bank Board should be criticised for mistakes that they've made, which was partly the reason why they put out the significant report today about the targeting of interest rates. Now, remember that this was only lifted in November last year, that they wanted to keep the 3-year government bond yield at 0.1%. But market forces were against them. They refused to believe that inflation was going to take off in Australia and around the world. And so really, in many ways, what happened was that the Reserve Bank was slow. Now, we can show you this by seeing the central banks around the world and their current cash rates. You can see that, New Zealand, 2%. You can see the United States now between 1.5% and 1.75%. You can see it in the UK, much, much higher than Australia. Australia, 0.85%. And so it's got to play catch up now. And that means that the speed and also the size of those interest rates really does create significant harm for homeowners and businesses, but also then the potential of tipping the economy off the rails.
So is this history in recent months why the new Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, wants to have this independent review of the RBA? I know the RBA Governor would have preferred that to be an in-house review. The Treasurer says no way, and I think he's right. It will be an externally led review. What do you think it's going to deliver in terms of perhaps reform?
Well, the main thing, I think, is about the composition of the board, which right now comes from industry leaders who, to be honest, their information and knowledge is important. But you've also got to have some dissenting views. In Australia, with the Reserve Bank, we don't really see how that board votes, whether there's dissent, whether there's disagreement at the board level. It's speaking with one voice. Now, I recognise that, but if you go to the United States, the Federal Reserve, you can actually see the way the various members vote. You also see a much more transparent Federal Reserve as compared with our Reserve Bank with a press conference after each of its decisions. Now, the reality is here in Australia, we need to have questioning of the Reserve Bank Governor. We need to understand the processes they're going through and what they're seeing so we can all make up our own minds. We don't want them to make up our minds as to whether we borrow or don't borrow or save or don't save. But what we want to know is the best knowledge that they have, the best information that they have so we can make our own minds up. That's what you ask of your central bank, I think, and it's certainly not what we're being given right now.
All right, back on to energy. Obviously, we've got issues with supply constraints, but talk today of price gouging. The ACCC are now launched a probe into the issues of energy affordability. Now, fair enough, but it seems at the moment we do a lot of inquiring and reviewing, but not a lot of action to fix some of these issues. Even the Energy Security Board's draft capacity mechanism, we're not going to have that finalised before the end of the year, and it doesn't come into force until 2025. But of course, the crisis is now, Ross.
Oh, the crisis is right now. We need energy right now. However we can get it, doesn't matter whether it's coal or gas or hydro or wind or solar, whatever it is, we need every electron that we can get right now. It's missing. Now, the problem also is at some point AEMO has to hand the market back to the market because otherwise you've got a nationalised electricity system. One issue is, I think, when the ACCC investigates whether there has been deliberate price gouging. Now, if you're in business and you know supply and demand, you know, it really is a situation where you're trying to get the highest price for your product as you possibly can. But in the electricity market, there are rules written in there which say that you cannot limit supply. That's key. Now, one interesting test for Jim Chalmers could be if the ACCC in the future actually issues a notice to Jim Chalmers that there has been, shall I say, poor dealings going on in the energy market. He has the ability to basically take away the ownership of that generator from the owner. Now, that would be a big test of Jim Chalmers as a treasurer and certainly of this government if it decided to divest somebody of either a gas-fired or a coal-fired power station.
All right, just quickly before we go, two state budgets, Queensland and New South Wales, a lot of spending, a lot of red ink. What was the market reaction?
Well, you know, the interesting part about this that I see is, well, you can't spend your way out of an economic downturn if you're going to have an economic downturn. This is the reason why I was surprised by both budgets, I would say, which are both very big spending, have both got very big growth assumptions in them, and really believe long term that they can actually sort of end up being back in surplus, both of them. So, as I say, I wish them both well. I hope it all goes very well for them, both of them. But I've got to say, there is a lot of spending and a lot of debt for what appears to be, as you described at the beginning, choppy waters ahead.
Sir Humphrey would say it's pretty heroic, those economic assumptions. Ross Greenwood, thank you for your time.